So thanks everyone for joining our CARBD Q&A session. Really excited for our session today where we have both Scott and Elizabeth, which I would like to hand over to introduce herself. But this is really an opportunity for us to ask Scott and Elizabeth questions about nutrition and as it relates to sports and performance. We've teed up two really interesting topics today, and then we'd like to leave some room for Q&A as well at the end. So please don't be shy about bringing your questions forward. So with that, I'll hand over to Elizabeth to give a brief introduction, and then we'll dive into our first topic. So Elizabeth, over to you.
Okay. Hi, Elizabeth Inpyn, fellow Purple Patch athlete. Matt's been coaching me for, gosh, maybe since 2011. So very early on. As far as nutrition goes, I am a sports performance nutritionist. So I have my master's in nutrition with a focus on sports performance. I have had my own business for a little over 8 years, and now fun getting to work with Scott and Jonathan and kind of collaborate with all of you guys and start taking on some athletes through this platform and kind of sharing some of the workload and some of the kind of content development and stuff with Scott. So nice to meet you guys. Hopefully I'll get to know all of you better.
Great. We're thrilled to have you on, Elizabeth. So with that being said, so Scott, over to our first topic. This is really all around racing in hot weather, right? Right now, we're right in the season, in the middle of racing, and we've been going through this huge heat wave in the US. And so this question has been coming up a lot and would love your thoughts on this topic.
Okay, so we're certainly not going to cover everything today. And I think what I want to do is to be able to share. How can I share my screen? Jonathan, can you share that presentation? Is that all right?
Sure. Yeah, give me 1 second.
I don't know how to share it on Zoom. Sorry. The technical aspects of Zoom always get me. Sorry, guys. So anyway, look, it's a lot of hot weather racing, and what we've seen currently in the US is some pretty hot races across Florida, and then we had CDA the other day, where apparently the usual drop rate for an Ironman athlete is around 6%. I think they had 35% dropout in that race. So it was fairly unique in that the weather obviously caused a lot of issues to a lot of athletes, and this is probably related to the fact that a lot of athletes, despite knowing that it was going to be very hot, failed to acclimatize or acclimate to what they were going to be racing in. So what I'm going to talk about today is just a quick overview of what heat acclimation is, and then the benefits of heat acclimation. And then all I'm going to touch on is really some simple ways and just literally talk about the hot water protocol and how it can be done and why it can be done, and just some practical questions relating to that. So can everyone see that screen? Can you make it just full screen, John?
I can, yeah. Give me 1 second. I'll go to full screen. So all these like Zoom things blocking the way here.
Okay, so heat acclimation is, as that definition says, is that it's repeated exposure to heat-inducing adaptations can enhance thermoregulatory mechanisms and heat tolerance, resulting in improved performance in warm to hot conditions. Okay, so this is a review that was performed a couple of years ago, and I'm sure there's probably more recent reviews, but they're all saying the same things, is that in order to perform in hot to or warm to hot weather, you need to effectively adapt to that by exposing yourself to repeated heat sort of efforts. And there's a difference between heat acclimation and acclimatization. Acclimatization is effectively when you go to the environment. Acclimation is more induced through artificial means. So can we go to the next screen? So in terms of ergogenic effects, you can see here that there are a lot of effects and positive effects as a result of heat acclimation or training in moderate to warm temperatures. They include decreased, and this is during exercise, okay? So reduced heart rate, reduced exercising heart rate, increased exercise stroke volume, improvements in muscle glycogen sparing, decreased oxygen consumption, increased sweat rates, increased sweat sensitivity. So, and increased mass loss when you are actually training in this. So you need to be conscious of these effects and then work around training to improve them, but then also manage those from a nutritional standpoint. So we'll go to the next one. So what could be done? Okay, so from an athlete perspective, you can either go and train in hotter environments, and that results, if you look at a lot of it, there's a lot of different ways of doing this, but a lot of them rely on around 60 to 90 minutes a day for somewhere between 5 and 14 days. And there's all different ways of doing heat acclimation. So controlled hypothermia is effectively doing the same amount of exercise in the same controlled temperature. There's self-paced, there's heart rate control. So self-paced would be at a certain speed, whilst the heart rate control would be at a certain heart rate. And then there's constant workload, which would be mainly on the bike. Due to real world constraints, not all of you are professional athletes, which have the ability to go and do camps, for instance, in where you're going to be racing. Often you just turn up a day before the race, then it's not always possible to do this. So potentially what we look at is then passive heat exposure that could provide you with an option to actually improve. And what we've seen with a number of the purple patch athletes that I've worked with is we've employed these passive heat exposure protocols, and as a result, their anecdotal reporting and obviously their results have been really outstanding in the races. And so I believe it is an effective way of creating some form of heat acclimation. So there's sauna, which a lot of people previously have used, I understand, at Purple Patch, and that's been pushed. Again, 20 to 30 minutes, 50 to 100 degrees. You can read it there, 5 to 21 days. The issue I've got with sauna is that it requires a sauna. Not everyone has a sauna in their backyard. If you do, you're very lucky. But with COVID and lockdown, it created a lot of issues. And also, unless you've got it at home, you're going to have to go to the gym to do it, and that just creates a headache. So what my preferred method is, but it obviously involves having a bath in the house, which I'm fairly certain majority of people will have a bath. Although if you live in, I guess, downtown San Francisco in a small unit, you may not. But all it requires is a bath, starting with at least 30 minutes, building up to 60. I don't necessarily see a whole lot of benefit going up to 60 minutes at this point in time, but I haven't necessarily pushed athletes to that. Definitely starting at 40 degrees Celsius. It sounds hot. It's actually not too bad. At least 10 days. That seems to be the key, at least going to 10 days. But reading the research, it seems to be that you could do a lot longer and benefit from that, stopping a lot earlier in your taper and still have the benefits of that heat acclimation. You need to go up to your neck level. You certainly need to use a thermometer, and it needs to be done either immediately after the exercise session or immediately before. Sorry, something's happened. Sorry, I got disconnected. Am I back?
Okay. Yep, you're back. We can hear you.
Sorry. Okay. So from a practical standpoint, you need to be doing at least 7 days. The research is saying that you need to do it over 7 days for it to be effective. The other really interesting thing about the research in this area is that more advanced or fitter athletes tend to adapt faster. So depending on where you put yourself, if you are a less trained athlete or you don't put yourself in the higher category, then maybe you need to be doing longer bouts of this heat acclimation compared to someone who is fitter. But I would certainly say the minimum you've got to do is a 7-day session. Missing a day in between, if you get stuck at work or you just can't physically do it because of some reason, don't panic. It's not going to necessarily ruin the whole effect. So I think that's a really important point, is that, you know, you're doing your 10-day protocol, something happens, a meeting comes up or a child gets sick, or you got to go out, don't panic, just keep doing it as you go. I would say do it at least, you know, start at least 11 days before the race. What I've been doing with most athletes is they've been finishing 48 hours before the race. I think this is quite nice, and you don't have to push it right up until the day before the race, because as you see, the effects of heat acclimation will last at least up to a month, even if you don't do anything afterwards. So based on that, you could really actually stop it a lot earlier and still benefit from that as you come into that taper. And so that would be a discussion with your coach, and probably with your nutritionist or whoever is working with your physiologist, if talking about, you know, that taper and finishing it maybe a week before the race, tapering down. What I've usually been doing, and from a practical experience, is, as I said, is finishing at 48 hours before a race. If you use a shorter protocol, the rates will decay faster. So, you know, definitely more than 7 days, ideally at least 11, but you could do it consistently, you know, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and then stop it potentially a week out from the race.
Great. And then there's 2 follow-up questions that came up, Scott, from Rob.
Yep.
What if I've got a Z2 session? Does it matter to do it straight after?
Yeah, it doesn't matter. Just do it after the session. It's so the interesting, because this is passive, and what they've shown is that you don't need to do. So originally it was thought that you had to exercise in hot weather in order to get the benefits of heat training. But what they're showing is you can train and then go and do passive heating and still get the benefits from it.
Great. And then a question from Jordan. What if you leave a cooler climate? What if you leave a cooler climate and you relocate to the hot environment a week before the race?
Yeah, so and I'm not covering in this talk, Jordan, I'm not going to actually talk about training in hot areas, but if you're going to train in, and I touched on it right at the start, is that you need to be doing more than 7 days if you're going to go and train there. So I think most of the research it said is something like 11 to 31 days, I think was what it was in the, keep going up. It's fine, I'll get that to you. But effectively what it's saying is that you can train there for 5 to 14 days, but most of the research says that you need to be there for probably at least 10 days in order to get those benefits. And then there's one more slide right at the end. Oh, go back up. Go back up. Sorry. Oh, just there. Okay. So the question would be, are you heat acclimatized? How do you know if you've actually got the benefits? So, sorry. You would have a lower heart rate during the training session. You would have a lower perceived rate of perceived exertion during the training, and you potentially have a lower sweat rate in the training. Now, a lot of that you could probably track with whatever trackers you're using in terms of heart rate. RPE is very subjective, and if you are doing repeated sweat tests, you may see a difference in that, and that would need to be done more than once. Is passive heating exertion enough? Probably not in terms of prepare you for the actual event. So to Jordan's point, there's probably nothing like actually running in hot weather and actually experiencing that and going through the practicalities of sort of rehydrating and eating and all that. What this does is prepare you from probably more a physiological standpoint, but it may not prepare you subjectively to what you're going to endure. That's why what I am recommending, I think, for athletes is, you know, train in hot weather, make it artificial. If it has to be indoors, and I've done this recently with a few guys, is, you know, put the temperature up at least to 25 degrees. It doesn't have to be above 25 degrees, and that's another conversation we can have. there doesn't seem to be much benefit in terms of pumping the temperature up to sort of like 30, 35 when you're doing the indoor sessions, but certainly around that temperature of 25 degrees seems to be important. So put on extra clothing, put on the heaters, train like that. And as the guys from SEAL Team 6 always say, get comfortable being uncomfortable. And it is amazing when you start to actually put the temperature up and not train and do all your sessions in a lovely air-conditioned, fan-blown sort of Swift session, and actually then do it at a temperature that might be closer to what you're racing. You'll find when you do the sweat test, you'll find when you're doing the carbohydrate loading or testing or consumption, that suddenly everything gets a little bit harder. And that's what you need to be practicing. So look, from my point of view, that's all I'm going to talk about today. I know it's fairly quick, and this topic we can talk about a lot more. I think in terms of future conversations we can have, we can look at maintaining the effects, greater detail of the effects, food and fluid intake during how you manage that in the heat and what to do, and then cooling strategies that you can implement in training and also during the races. And we can touch on those at future talks.
Great, thanks, Scott. And then you included this slide. I wasn't sure the context.
It's just a panda in a hot bath. I thought it was quite good.
Okay. Awesome. All right, let me shift back to my other screen. So I know, there's probably a lot of follow-up questions here. I see Jordan's entered another one in the chat. For today, we do want to get to another topic for Elizabeth to cover. So Jordan, we can kind of follow up with you over email and see if we can get Scott to, answer that as well. So next topic, another very often asked question recently with summer and a lot of athletes that are traveling either for races or just to visit family, like I am this week in New Orleans. There's been a lot of questions on how do you stay on point with your nutrition while traveling? And to answer that question, Elizabeth has great strategies and tips that she'd like to share with the group.
Jonathan, let's see if I can share my screen here. I emailed you the presentation also.
Okay, great.
Just while you're doing that, just to Jordan's question, which is, can you end the protocol earlier? You don't want the athletes taking hot baths in Kona because of practical elements. Absolutely. If you don't want them doing it, I mean, there's certainly no harm in doing baths in Kona, and I'd probably say it would be beneficial. But because the protocol, the effects of the heat acclimation protocol will last up to a month, if they want to relocate out to Kona a week before the race and they've done the protocol leading up to that, then certainly they wouldn't have to do any more, and they get to do sort of concurrent training in hot environment. So you would see the effects anyway. They're not completely eradicating the heat acclimation protocol. And that's probably a really good strategy to do as well. I think, I'm sure there's a subjectiveness to this as well, like, making the athletes feel very comfortable. So I can see the point in that, where it's just one less stress they have to think about when they go out there, focus on the training, focus on the fueling, rehydration, and all those other things that the athletes need to focus on when they're in Kona.
And I am able to share. So Elizabeth, just let me know when you want me to jump to the next slide.
Perfect. All right. So I think there's two kind of main concerns when you're looking at traveling and nutrition. There's if you're traveling for a race, and then if you're just traveling for fun or work, and the tips are pretty much the same. It's just kind of your focus might be a little bit different. So I like to tell my athletes, do what you can with what you have and just remain flexible. It's never going to be quote unquote perfect. So you just kind of have to make the best with what you have. All right, next. So in general, I think the travel hygiene component of it, especially if you're traveling for racing, but also if you're traveling for work, none of us want to get sick. And there's always that risk when traveling. the incidence of like upper respiratory tract infection, GI issues. A lot of people when they travel, there's constipation, dehydration. So really staying ahead of it and just kind of being mindful of what the concerns are for when you're going to be traveling. And especially if you're racing, you obviously don't want to show up to your race, sick and under the weather. So I think there's kind of some practical tips and then just some of my personal preferences. And I'm going to try to go through all these slides relatively quickly, but if you have questions, feel free to ask, follow up with us. I know Scott and I can always, kind of work with you individually if you have some concerns. So hygiene wise, obviously washing your hands, soap and water, masks and face coverings. Thank you, COVID. That's now a lot more popular or more acceptable, I guess. But always something that, especially if you are traveling on any kind of mass transit, if you're not driving to your location, obviously just being mindful of that. Upping your intake of vitamin D, probiotics, and I kind of listed the 2 strains there that are best. And zinc is another one, not preventative per se, but if you start to feel that scratchy throat or like you're starting to get under the weather, maybe like pain in your ears or head congestion, zinc lozenges with vitamin C can definitely help alleviate or lessen some of those symptoms and possibly shorten the duration of any kind of illness that you might be picking up. And as far as traveling personally, I always, I have some oil of oregano pills that I will take like the day before, during travel, and then returning home. Those are it's immune boosting. It's kind of, more of an herbal remedy, but something that I found has worked really well for me and a lot of my athletes. I really like turkey tail mushroom powder. I think functional mushrooms are kind of the next big topic. I mean, they've been around forever, but it's kind of like when people realized kale was good for you out of the blue, miraculously. The same with mushroom powders. So turkey tail is one that's known for immune boosting. And then greens powders. I like to take mine with me, and I'll talk about it later as a strategy, but it's hard to mix and find all your fruits and veg and kind of stay on track. And I think a lot of athletes will get constipated when they travel. And so having a greens powder can help kind of keep everything regular, but also make sure you're getting in the vitamins and minerals that you need while you're traveling. All right, next. So if you have, I divided it up into car and airline travel. So if you're traveling in the car, which is obviously the most convenient because you can stop when you want, bring all the food that you want, beverages, etc. Really make it the trip about like the best strategy for you. Bring your own snacks. Obviously is a good way to do it, and I'll list some specifics later. Planning your meals according to like your competition schedule. So if you're just driving to a race the morning of, obviously you can plan to eat in the car if that's possible. And so, being strategic about when and what you're eating. And then always I like to remind people to, bring a bottle filled with water, electrolytes when you're traveling, either in the car or airplane, train, bus, just to make sure that you're staying hydrated while you're traveling. Okay. Also, I think there's a tendency if we're stuck in the car to possibly eat out of boredom. So really being mindful, and this is part of just if you're traveling, like if you have a job where you travel for work a lot and you're stuck in the car or on an airplane, sometimes we mindlessly eat. So I think it's important to remember to not only stay on your training plan, but also you could be less active if you didn't have time to train before you left. So being mindful of how much you're eating. But on the flip side, though, that's not a sign to drastically reduce the number of calories that you're consuming. It's just paying attention to what you're eating and not over consuming while you're stuck in a car or an airplane. I find it's really helpful to kind of plan ahead. So this could be my type A personality, but I think knowing the route that you're taking and where you're going to stop for lunch or what grocery stores are along the way. I've been known to map out and travel from Whole Foods to Whole Foods because I know I can get healthy things there that I like and restock on snacks. And just knowing that prevents any kind of planning prevents um, making less than stellar choices. And not that I have anything against in and out if that suits you well. It's just if you're trying to stick to your nutrition plan and that you haven't worked those calories into your day, then you just want to make sure that you're planning um, for the foods that you need and the foods that you like, and also the foods that are going to make you feel good, so you don't arrive bloated or constipated or just like you've eaten too much for the day. And then the cooler, when you're in the car, that's the best part about it. So there's cooler bags, real coolers that you can put ice packs in, obviously. And I would say being mindful of packing snacks and healthy foods is just as important as being mindful of making sure you're taking all of your gear with you and all that kind of stuff. So next, thanks. All right, air travel. This is a much longer discussion. So when we talk about jet lag and reducing some of those symptoms and kind of handling and managing that, but in general, a couple days, especially if you're flying in the eastward direction, making sure that you're there a few days before so that you can kind of get your body acclimated to the new time, meal patterns, circadian rhythms. However, when you're on the plane specifically, you want to either, if your airline happens to have great meals, that's good. A lot of them don't. So then that's bringing your own snacks. And again, I'll talk about some that I love. Remembering again not to overeat. The long travel, if it's like a cross-country flight or international flight, drinking fluids and having your own fiber-rich food so that you're not constipated. Airline air can be very dry and dehydrating. So stress enough, if there's one thing that you do, make sure it's that you hydrate, and also kind of getting up several times to get your body moving a bit can help with that. Asking for, like, speaking up when you're traveling. I found either if it's with the airplane, and don't feel bad about asking for more water. Don't feel bad at your hotel for asking if there isn't a mini fridge in there for them to bring it, or to empty it so that you have room to put your stuff. Like, speaking up, this is your trip, this is your travel. They're there to help accommodate you. And if that's going to make you a better athlete at the end by speaking up, don't be afraid to do it. As people pleaser, I know sometimes, or I used to not want to make people go the extra step, but they're always usually happy to help. And then if caffeine affects you, being careful, especially if you're trying to adjust to a different sleep schedule, limiting caffeinated drinks so that when you arrive, you're either, or using the caffeine on the flip side to kind of manipulate and help you stay awake. And two supplements that can help, again, we could talk in detail, melatonin and caffeine, for opposite reasons, helping you sleep versus helping you stay awake. But both can be effective, especially with jet lag, in order to kind of get your body on the right track. Next. So some of my favorite practical tips. I will always carry either protein powder or meal replacement powder so that I'm sure that I'm getting in at consistent intervals the protein that I need. That's the one box that I'll make sure to check when I'm traveling. And most protein companies now all sell single serve packets of your protein powder. But if not, put them in Ziploc baggies. You can make your own. I find labeling them helps. Back in the day, I definitely had some strange looks when I just had bags of white powder in my bag. So putting some tape on there and labeling them can help. And knowing, okay, I always plan for like 2 shakes a day when traveling, and I know I'll get at least one, but I don't want to be without. So I'll kind of over plan to make sure that I have enough. As I said, greens powders are a great way to make sure that you're still getting in kind of some of those vitamins and minerals. Obviously not in every day. I mean, you can take them every day, but especially helpful when you're traveling. Travel foods that I love: packs of oatmeal, nut butter, sports bars, those single serve foods, obviously apples, bananas, carrots, avocado. That sounds weird, but I always have avocados. Jerky, kind of the lower sodium, low sugar kind, hard-boiled eggs. I will do packets of either hemp seeds for the plant-based people that need a little, whether it's extra protein that you're adding, or you want to make sure you're getting your omega-3s, nuts, obviously, tuna in pouches, that's pretty standard now. Any to-go salads, making even your own and putting it in Tupperware. Edamame is a great snack, yogurt, all that kind of stuff. And then for those of us, at least in the US, I know Starbucks, you can pretty much find a decent snack now there. They have little kind of bento boxes with hard-boiled eggs, chicken, hummus, cheese, fruit, and some pretty all right salads. Again, you're doing the best with what you have. So even if it's quick, if you're traveling for work, that's kind of an easy option. There's usually a Starbucks around, Trader Joe's and Whole Foods. All right, next. Vitamins, if you regularly take your supplements, I want to kind of remind you, I've had athletes that either forget to take them or think, oh, it's not that important. I'll be, traveling for 2 weeks and I'll just do it when I get back. If you're taking those supplements for vitamin and mineral deficiencies, it is really important that you stay consistent. So grabbing those pill boxes that have the days of the week and filling those up, that can be really helpful so you don't have to carry all of your bottles of pills with you. It's something I started doing if I knew well enough in advance. Sending food ahead to your hotel or Airbnb is totally possible. A lot of Airbnb hosts are more than willing to accommodate, and they'll, take the package and make sure that it's in the house when you arrive. Same thing with the hotel. So you can either ship food if you get the cold pack, or just kind of staples if it's the dry pack. And then once you're there, always heading to, like, mapping out where the closest grocery store is so that you can stock up on foods for your stay. And as I mentioned earlier, having that mini fridge cleared out of stuff so that there's room. And obviously you can get ice from the hotel, or you can bring your own ice packs and ask the hotel to put them in their refrigerator or freezer and get them frozen for you so that you have those in yours. If you're desperate, you can always use the coffee maker to make oatmeal or hard-boiled eggs. Pretty easy trick, hack. Maybe we'll do like a video on it. I'm sure you can look it up online, both. I'm sure it's out there somewhere. I didn't invent it. I saw someone do it. And then if you know that you're staying at a hotel and don't have access to a kitchen, if you're ordering at a restaurant, doubling up on your meal, or so that you have leftovers, or asking them, to add more protein or extra greens or veggies, always a possibility to hit those nutrient requirements. So with the app, it's handy enough, you know what you're supposed to be getting. And if you're looking at it, knowing portion sizes, and kind of trying to align those, it's pretty easy to find something on the menu and then just kind of get creative and add what you need in order to stay aligned with your goals. All right, next. And this, just a little graphic that I try to share when it's, better, not perfect. If you're kind of reading down the line, eat more for protein sources of like the Greek yogurt, the hard-boiled eggs and edamame, and then maybe some of like the string cheese and protein bars and jerky, and less. I don't know how many of us actually eat hot dogs, but I didn't create this graphic. So, less of the less desirable things. So focusing more on the green. Same thing with the fats, having those healthy fats in there. And again, are you going to have a hot dog? Maybe, I don't know. But if you're having that one day while you're traveling, try to do the Greek yogurts and the hard-boiled eggs and the lean fish and things like that on the other days. So better, not perfect. All right. Sorry, I went over my 10 minutes just a little. There's the fast version.
Thanks, Elizabeth. That was super helpful. I definitely took down several notes. So we do have a couple minutes here for a sort of audience Q&A. If there's any questions anyone has, please go ahead and unmute and chime in.
I've got a question for you, Elizabeth. I mean, and I guess it's for a lot of the athletes out there. Is a preference? I mean, if you can get a serviced apartment as opposed to a hotel room, would we say that that's a better option for most people and try and share with athletes, or is sharing an apartment with athletes not preferable? Jordan, I'd be interested in your opinion on that as well.
I would say my personal opinion, I will always Airbnb, get a home or a room. Like hotel, as convenient as that might be, I like to be able to have my own space, be able to have a kitchen. I just think it's a lot more functional and easier to follow a meal plan. And I think I found myself and my athletes are also much more comfortable when they have a space that they can maintain their same schedule and their same eating patterns.
Jordan, do you have any?
Yeah, I'll put my video on too. So I'm dealing with my poor little kitten that's got a collar on. So she's upset. So I do agree that for most key races and even training camps, I'd want to stay in a place that has a kitchen. However, that can be a challenge if you're traveling internationally. For example, I've traveled to like Vietnam to race, China to race, and navigating supermarkets and markets for fresh food would not be an option. So there are times when that's having access to a kitchen is a non-starter. However, Sarah Piampiano, who we all know, was a pro at traveling with her makeshift kitchen. And actually, Gwen Jorgensen, who a lot of people also know, as YouTubed about this recently. But simple things like you can get travel size rice cookers. You can make sure you take knife, fork, and spoon, and maybe like a foldable bowl, like kind of camping supply stuff, to be able to prepare decent meals in your hotel room. I mean, rather than going and ordering the meal with like a fancy sauce in a restaurant, it may be easier to buy like some a rotisserie chicken and to cook some fresh rice for yourself, things like that, and keep like food simple and plain pre-race. That's the kind of thing I've been able to manufacture in a hotel room. So
yeah, it's a really good point. I was always, I mean, you talk about Sarah and obviously working with her, it was always amazing seeing her amount of items that she would pack. And obviously it depends on the individual and how much luggage you can take. But Kmart does do a very small, I think it's like $10 or $12 for a rice cooker. And she, as Jordan said, would always pack it with her. I mean, she was a professional athlete, but she would always make her own rice bars to take on the Ironman as well. It's not something I necessarily push on a lot of people because I think you've got a lot of other things to worry about, but she would actually sit and make her rice bars that she would use on the bike. But to Jordan's point, and also to Elizabeth's point, you know, she would pack her own rice in her own Ziploc bags. She would take her own sauces. She would take sort of tuna in packets, freeze-dried foods, especially traveling, as Jordan mentioned, to countries like Vietnam or China. And it's not anything to do with racism or anything like that. It's just the unknown of what is going to be there and the quality of the food that may not present itself to you. So to control the controllables and reduce the potential for error, it makes sense to take all your stuff with you. Now, again, do the best you can. I'm not saying pack the whole kitchen. You know, that's up to you, but you can certainly, you know, ensure that you're a little bit more relaxed when you get there. And I can think of an athlete who's not on this call who, you know, the day before last week's race said, "Oh, what do I do for breakfast tomorrow?" And I'm like, "What do you mean? You know, you should have had your oats in that Ziploc bag." He forgot to take his protein powders. Thankfully, he remembered to take at least gels and blocks and electrolytes. But, you know, it's just like, it makes me panic when an athlete is messaging me going, "Oh, what do I eat the morning of the race?" You should have all that ready, and you should have practiced all that prior to the race many, many times, so that you wake up in the morning, you're 60 to 80 grams of oats with, you know, your protein powder and whatever else is there, all measured out in a Ziploc bag. You put it in the bowl, you put hot water in it, and that's done. And I can't stress that enough. Take out any of the stress by just being mechanistic about the way you approach this. It's no different to the way in which we talk about carbohydrate consumption or fluid consumptions. The whole point is it's not one-offs. You're just doing it over and over again so that it's not a stress on race day. So I think it is really valid and important point what Jordan has raised there in terms of just, you know, take what you can, and that supports what Elizabeth talked about there, is like just be really on point with what you're trying to achieve.
All right. So we're
I saw there's one question. I'll just answer that.
One question from Mike.
So, and Mike, that sort of is a good lead in and a sort of finisher for this.
And sorry,
like
just
whatever.
real quick, I'll just highlight the question because the people listening to the replay may not hear it. So Mike asked, what are some good night before race meal suggestions? Yeah.
So the first thing to say about that is whatever you've been practicing in training the night before, like race-like conditions or long bricks, is what you're going to eat the day before a race. You're not going to suddenly go and eat a butter chicken, which I have heard of athletes doing. They think, oh, it's a good idea to go to the local Indian restaurant or Chinese restaurant and eat something they've never eaten. So what I would say is keep it very simple. So usually it's going to be something like, a simple pasta with a simple sauce, with probably a very simple protein like a lean, probably chicken if you're happy to eat meat. If it's not, eat something that if you're a vegetarian or vegan that you have eaten many times before, which doesn't have much spice. It's probably going to be very plain. It's providing you with enough carbohydrates to meet at least that meal's amount, and obviously your entire day before. You're looking at loading, so you're probably looking at around 6 grams per kilo body weight of carbohydrates, hitting your protein amounts and hitting your fat intake as well. So keep it really simple. Jordan has posted, she wrote an article about travel cooking, and we can post that. I can post that on Instagram, and I can tag Jordan in that so that you can follow up on that, and we can send that out also to with the recording of this video. And I know a lot of Jordan's articles are really useful in terms of the practicality of that, and I think Elizabeth has written several articles on that as well. So I think the key thing, Mike, with that is just it's whatever you've been eating leading up to in training that has prepared you for the race the next day.
Great. Well, with that, we're up on our time for this session. Our goal is to have these a lot more regularly, and I think there's no shortage of topics we can cover. So I'd like to thank Elizabeth and Scott and also Jordan for chiming in with your tips as well. This was a very informative session. I surely learned a lot, and we look forward to having everyone on again for our next session. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jonathan, and thank you everyone for attending.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. Cheers.
Cheers.